Mathematics is a tool by which we construct our worldview and way of thinking. The basic actions of adding, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing are the 4 arithmetic operations. We added 4 new operations: cut, move, superimpose, and flip, and patented a quantum gate for a quantum computer. 1 apple cut 2 is half and half, left and right. What? You might be able to compute the concepts left and right. Right and left are concepts. Then it exists at both ends of the apple, like a plane without mass. Just as a coin is 3-dimensional, but the front and back surfaces are 2-dimensional, making it a concept in a sense. This will be the command symbol that moves between and among those concepts. The symbol that creates the concept is the cat. Cut operator. This symbol is dynamization arithmetic. A function is generated between the concepts of right and left. Cut operator 2f is superposition arithmetic. Let a and b be the limits of a certain range. This equation indicates a value that moves between a and b. There are 2 ways to use this operation: relative gradation and absolute attribute. The upper part calculates the gradation, while the lower part judges a and b. The answer in this case is a, but you also have to account for the ratio between x and y. So that means determine whether a positive or b negative, and the ratio becomes change in xy ratio. Any entity that changes with time can be represented by a curve. I hit them with the old y is x squared. Curves are functions. This arithmetic is a calculation that overlaps the 2, since the function is output from the a and b decisions and the time-varying curve of the gradient. If you put an f on the shoulder of the operator, it becomes a super-invariant equation. Superimposition equations contain integral and differentials. Integral. Differential. And find the relationship between their functions. Where is 0? Where is infinity? Overlapping these 2 contradictory states is superposition. In that case, the infinity of differentiation and the infinity of integral overlap, creating a reversal of polarity and quality. You will be able to see how the separated blocks of the 4 arithmetic operations differentiation and integration are woven into a single operation thread in a series of flows. Superposition arithmetic overlapping integral and differentiation with. Question: what happens to gravity at 0 distance from the center of gravity? The formula still used today to calculate the gravitational orbits of planets includes a term that calculates gravity and distance, mr. This is also how we calculate the orbits of satellites and planets. Mass, distance from center of gravity, Schwarzschild solution. This is a solution to the gravity equation created under the simplest condition. What if there is only one stationary substance? Explain zero division. Riemann sphere. There is a Riemann sphere of diameter 1, infinity. Let infinity be the upper pole. 0 distance gravity is calculated by replacing the distance r with 0. Of course, 1 is also the distance of here as well, and it becomes a model in which infinity is aggregated as one point at the north pole of the Riemann sphere. Draw an arbitrary line from infinity to the complex plane. There is a point right out of contact with the sphere. If we move this point closer to infinity, the line becomes gradually more parallel. To the complex plane, which means infinity. When the line connecting the north pole and the infinity point is parallel to the complex plane, since infinity is regarded as the reciprocal of 0 in the Riemann sphere, use totalization, and the image becomes, since infinity is regarded as the reciprocal of 0 in the Riemann sphere, division by 0 can be regarded as multiplication by infinity. The intersection point of the origin overlaps the upper pole of the sphere. The theory states that dividing by 0 is to infinity. From a certain point of view, superplan, 0 and infinity, all upon a single axis of the gradient. Under the initial conditions of the theory, this length is an infinite distance. If we read 0 division as infinity integration, we get multiplied by anything is 0 and therefore divided by 0 is divided by anything. Question: what happens to gravity at 0 distance from the center of gravity? Current answer: therefore, it is safe to assume that the physical quantity 0 distance does not exist. I'm not convinced that we shouldn't do 0 division, or that 0 distance doesn't exist, or that we're escaping the infinitesimal paradox. Superposition. So, I thought about the new Riemannian sphere model by using the gap of Mitsuyoshi operator. Then the infinite distance disappeared in infinity, and 0 overlapped. This is the mechanism that embodies the basic calculation of multiplication. Zero and infinity connect and overlap at a point. 0 is congruent to infinity. 0 is congruent to infinity. Superposition. One cut 2 is 2 pieces of apple which are divided by moving cut line. And generates function. Superposition calculation. The break of the Mitsuyoshi operator goes to the left, there will be infinity as a plus 1. The opposite is negative 1. Here we use the Mobius strip mechanism to compute the infinite superplan of qualitative and polar. If you move the cut of the Mitsuyoshi operator on the left to the right, it becomes overlap of 0 and 1. If you move the cutoff of the Mitsuyoshi operator on the right to the left, it becomes overlapping of 0 and negative 1. Zeros and ones are superimposed on the vertical axis with alternating positive and negative polarities so that they are orthogonal to the positive and negative horizontal vectors at the center. If we assume this is an imaginary number, in mathematics, 1 is the only certain existence. That is to say, 1 represents existence itself. If this is the case, we can also say that 1 infinity, this gradually overlaps the gradation, and there may be an imaginary number gate at the coupling of the Mobius loop. Superposition. Zeros and ones are superimposed on the vertical axis with alternating positive and negative polarities so that they are orthogonal to the positive and negative horizontal vectors at the center. This is the overlap of differentiation and integration. So what makes the vertical axis with the imaginary numbers? When people think about the orrery of this imaginary root axis and the horizontal axis, they think that the imaginary number axis is straight along the horizontal axis instead of being orthogonal. This phenomenon is important, and logical thinking using not causes this illusion naturally. Stop trying. Assuming this is an imaginary number, it has a positive and a negative axis that are orthogonal to that axis when first imaginary number determined minus I is determined accordingly. The totems of logic with not. In superposition, the imaginary axis is vertical and 0, and 1 infinity outlook with alternating polarities. In science, only that which we can see is true. The material universe is simply a projection of our planar consciousness. Human Katu is man's superposition women. The presence of man is created by moving the Mitsuyoshi operator in infinite direction. Similarly, women is created by moving to minus infinity. Furthermore, by moving in the opposite direction 0 and 1, which represent nothingness and existence, overlap. At this time, it is recognized as an imaginary number because two different entities overlap. In addition, the Mobius function superimposes positive 1 and negative 0, negative 1 and positive 0 to generate plus I and minus I imaginary axes. LGBT is not imaginary, not digital. Zeros, ones. Common petal. See in this line of sight, if A then B overlaps in the straight line. A and B are clearly separated, which is orthogonal. B does not exist in the straight line, which is also to have separated. It looks like not A. Not B. This is useful symbol with dealing with human consciousness, not in mathematics. Not A. This imaginary axis model is made to easily interpret conscious bias using Bicomx numbers. There is no minus I, assuming a Bicomx number j for an imaginary number I they are orthogonal, so j overlaps the position of 1. As a concept, humans have a bias of being aware of different existences by separating plus and minus. Then plus and minus are orthogonal. In other words, we will consciously form plus and minus on the x-axis x0 and y-axis y0 with 0 as the starting point. Common petal. See in this line of sight, if A then B overlaps in a straight line, A and B are clearly separated, which is orthogonal. If you deviate even slightly from this axis, it becomes a function and also generates a vector, like in tension. And for minus I, if there is a similar consciousness, I and I will be formed on the x-axis x0 and y-axis y0 with 0 as the starting point. On the other hand, if there is a Bicomx number k, I is the product of j and k, so this also overlaps x at the -1 position. However, humans cannot naturally perceive this mechanism consciously, so why not imagine the anti-field? Conversely, it may be possible to reproduce the emergence of consciousness mechanically by constructing the anti-field with this orthogonal model using Bicomx numbers. As yet, mathematics and physicists are unaware of this area, the anti-field. Let's try something new. Old people, cis men and women, are clearly separated, which is orthogonal. Mitsuyoshi operator moves 0 to man. Women do not exist on a straight line, which appears to be separated, not man. Not women. The coupling of the Mitsuyoshi operator works as imaginary number gate. The operator moves 0 to infinity and beyond to -1 through the imperceptible negative world. And 1, 0 and -1 overlap to form an imaginary number. And with this operator, multiplication and division are integrated into integral and differential overlap. Superposition, Riemann sphere, which is projected from complex brane. Imagine two Riemann sphere and Riemann sphere on the both sides of Mitsuyoshi operator. Infinity, 0, 0 in the anti-field, infinity in the anti-field. Here, the complex brane appears on both sides, so it is naturally accepted that the imaginary axis, which is the concept, exists on the conceptual plane. Then, the red negative infinity imaginary number is the anti-imaginary number. Overlap of infinity of anti-zero. Overlap of anti-infinity and zero. Zero, one. One is identical to infinity. In the unconsciousness world, 0 and infinity are overlapped with the Mitsuyoshi operator. The ratio of overlap between 0 and infinity creates functions, which creates vibration and entanglement. I and I exist as the concepts on the both sides of Mitsuyoshi operator. 0 is generated in the cut line if it suggests the possibility of projecting the material universe from a flat surface. Isn't everything in point of view? If you think that you are projecting the material universe from a plane, an anti-field differential, and complex branes in the extended Riemannian sphere model, deeply related to consciousness. Now let's expand clue. There is an infinitesimal limit, the swelled radius, which cannot be made any smaller. The limit does n trends to 0, and to 0 means does not reach 0. Even the complex brane may be distorted by a gravitational field when matter is sucked into the limit from the positive infinite universe. It is expressed by the way two Mitsuyoshi operators overlap. That is why the straight line under the Mitsuyoshi operator is bent. Then, when the two circles of the Mitsu operator overlap, the blue line symbolizes the image of the imaginary axis on the complex brane intertwined. Eventually, when the blue lines of the imaginary axis are neatly arranged and the circles become one, the gravitational field becomes stronger and the complex brane field is distorted. Here, just before the Q state was expressed from the symbol change animation. When entering Q, only the complex brane, which is a concept, remains like the empty set, and the contents become empty. This state is imagined, and the circle is drawn with a dotted line. And although it keeps a huge amount of energy accumulated, it becomes an anti-world by breaking through the singularity. Suddenly, the maximum negative infinite universe appears remains discrete and is drawn to the swirled radius again. Then, a new universe is output to another space according to the law of limits again. At the time, the straight line of the Mitsuyoshi operator bends in the opposite direction. As Q becomes smaller and smaller, the positive and negative universes also approach each other. The slightest deviation determines the aspect of emergence. If the positive Riemann sphere reaches the limit first with a slight deviation, the negative world will be reversed and become like this. Similarly, as Q becomes smaller and smaller, the positive and negative universes also approach each other. This time, if the negative Riemann sphere reaches the limit first with a slight deviation, the positive world will be reversed and become like this. We predict this as an anti-field differential phenomenon. The anti-field differential is not the anti-differential, but is currently considered to be contains or emits a huge amount of field energy, as long as there is a slight deviation. If you think that you are projecting the material inverse from a plane, when consciousness approaches and becomes like this, does the imaginary square root axis, and the complex plane in the extended Riemannian sphere model have much to do with consciousness. In other words, the limit of consciousness is only the complex plane. But is it possible to connect with the opposite world if you break through this? Or is it possible to get out of this structure, which is the belly pipe prison in the extended Riemannian sphere model universe? If you bring this complex plane closer and closer, a limit point will appear there. With this as the Q, a patent for a quantum gate for a quantum computer was granted. We announced this at the NEC booth at the Supercomputer Society of America convention. What is Q? To make it easier for social scientists to imagine, both warriors and scholars have a shared quality as seekers, but because they are at opposite ends of dynamic and static, this kind of polarity reversal will be. On the other hand, there is a difference in the nature of learning and fighting, and you can understand it by reversing the quality. In this formula, when infinity and infinity are superimposed, emptiness and infinity overlap with the calculation mechanism of qualitative transformation and polarity reversal, called anti-field differentiation. Plus, minus, multiply, and division. Dynamization, superposition, flip. Can you see the four arithmetic operations as the warp and the four arithmetic additions as the weft? Pineapple McQueen squash.
Come on!